November 23rd, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ask everybody to mute your cell phone or other electronic devices and mute your microphone when you're not speaking to improve the sound quality of the meeting. Going to ask our village manager to do a roll call for attendance.
Thank you. Trustee Lampier?
Yes.
Trustee Dearborn?
Here.
Trustee Swerk?
Here.
Trustee Caladarchi?
Here.
Trustee Kripe? Yes, okay. Sorry. Trustee Apatow will be a little bit late, and President Rentz.
Here. Okay, we'll now move forward with the Pledge of Allegiance. I've asked Trustee Kripe to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Nope.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag
of the United
of the
States
United
of America
States of America and
and
to the
republic
Republic
for
for
which
for which it stands,
One
one
nation,
nation,
under
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty and justice
for all.
All right, thanks, Andy. All right, item number 3 is public comment. Kristen, I'm just going to ask you, do we have anybody in the meeting room or who has sent an email for public comment that is not pertinent to this evening's agenda?
President Rentz, we did have 2 public comments that are general comments that we received via email, and there are several members of the public in the Zoom meeting this evening. Would you like me to begin with reading the general comments?
That's fine, Kristen.
hungry a lot more than that, so maybe.
The first general comment is from Betsy Hoza Harutan. General comment. In light of recent events and likely due to less time in school and the cancellation of most after-school activities, Winnetka youth are spending their time vandalizing village public spaces, specifically Chestnut Court, Moffett Mall, and verbally harassing adults who ask them to clean up after themselves. This is not new behavior, but seems to have escalated in recent weeks and months. By the end of the day, the courtyard behind Village Hall is littered and the alley is covered in broken glass. Not only are these young teens vandalizing public property with broken glass, trash, and wasted food products, they are also walking around town and into stores and large groups without masks on. As an employee of a local business, I take the liberty of speaking on behalf of all the nearby businesses to say we are beyond the brink trying to keep our businesses afloat and do not need the added responsibility of babysitting. Equally, the local residents who live in the center of town do not need to be subjected to this either. I bring this topic to light in the public comment forum so that the village leaders will address this once and for all. The second public comment is from Charlotte Winters. Last night, I was visiting family near downtown Winnetka at about 4 p.m. and saw some things that worried me. Multiple groups of kids are hanging out in downtown Winnetka unsupervised, riding on bikes, loitering, and littering. I caught the group breaking glass Coke bottles in the alley between Lakeside and Harris Bank. I even saw a discarded whipped cream canister laying out in the alley, and it made me worried that they're out there huffing the whipped cream. My relative has also witnessed a group of boys shoplifting at Lakeside. My relative has lived in the area for over 10 years, so I frequently walk through the alley and know this is new since COVID started. Please do something about this problem. And President Rentz, these emails were also shared with Chief Hornstein, and he has immediately responded today by ordering stepped up enforcement in that area.
How about, Rob, how about if we ask Chief Hornstein to have the guys get out of the car and spend some time walking a beat? I know that they don't like to get out of the car because last night I observed them driving around the block for a half an hour never stopping to really look, but they were driving around. So maybe it's time they actually park it and walk around and let the kids know that they're actually capable of getting out of the car and make their presence a little bit more strongly known. I was surprised to see 2 units up there the other night, but they just drove around. So they need to do a better job on that. You know, I mean, look, part of having a nice downtown is it's going to attract people, and it's, you know, I've heard this from several people, and I know if Rob Apatow was on, he'd be all over this as well. But we have to have a little bit better presence and at least get the kids to settle down a little bit. I mean, Dwyer Park's a block away. They can go hang out there, and I'm not saying they should go out there and break Coke bottles, but there's plenty of room for them over there that doesn't require them getting into the business district.
My son and I go up into Moffett Park and have lunch up there when we go to Lakeside and get sandwiches, and there's litter all over the place. We pick it up and throw it away, but the kids are acting like knuckleheads. And I think Chris is right about encouraging the police to spend some time just sort of being a presence. Yesterday they were sort of all over the intersection of Chestnut and Elm Street. Again, just being kids, but I think a certain amount of adult presence might modify some of this stupid behavior.
And possibly part of that presence is just communicating with the kids as kids and adults, not as police maybe, you know, just to get them comfortable with the police and hopefully start cleaning up and not being such a nuisance.
Yeah, it's a relatively new phenomenon, but I think if they get out of the car and spend some time on the ground, that'll kind of help mitigate some of this as well.
You know, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the COVID situation, but I think it merits revisiting because it's not going to, you know, the issue isn't going away. Certainly the park, the post office park, as we call it, Dwyer Park, and, you know, the downtown areas, which are popular to hang out in, not everybody's wearing their masks. And I think we talked about maybe having like, you know, like little signs, you just like, you know, election signs that you just see, you know, on the little wire stands that we can put in like the parks and in Dwyer Park, just reminding people that it really is important. Please mask up. You know, nothing terrible, but just that a reminder that it still counts. Because I see a lot of families and stuff in the park, and you know, the adults might be wearing masks, the kids aren't. Whatever, it may be worth thinking about. Anyway,
I agree. Kristen, back to you.
Okay. So now we have members of the public in the Zoom room. So I will now recognize you and ask if you'd like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. The first person in the room is Carol H. Carol, I'm asking you to unmute, and if you would like to speak, please do so.
I just had a comment on the agenda for tonight, and my husband and I have reviewed the financial plan for the stormwater project and are in favor of it and hope that you will approve it and continue. We appreciate your work in this regard. We live on Ash Street, and we just hope you'll continue in this vein. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Next is Cass B. Cass, I'm asking you to unmute if you'd like to comment.
Sure. Yeah, this is Cass Baker. I live on DeWint Road, and yeah, no, my only comment is related to the stormwater and being in favor of it.
Thank you. And then there's user M Hales 01.
Hi, Mike.
Hey there, nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. And then there is Sheila.
Oh, yes, I have nothing to add. I sent my comments in earlier. We strongly urge the council to go forward with your plans. And that's it. Everything was in my email.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you. And finally, Kim.
Hi, nothing to add, just listening in. Thanks for all your work, trustees.
Thank you. And that is the extent of the public in the room, President Rentz, and there have been no additional phone calls or emails prior to the meeting.
Thank you, Kristen. All right, we'll move forward to item number 4. Declaration of emergency. In light of a rapid increase in COVID-19 cases, staff has requested enactment of a new emergency declaration related to emergency purchasing and emergency staffing. Staff believes that it is necessary and in the best interest of the village and its residents to issue the emergency declaration. The emergency declaration constitutes a declaration of a civil emergency under the village collective bargaining agreements. Village Attorney Peter Friedman is available for any questions. So, Rob, you want to help me out here because I don't know where you guys are going with this thing.
Sure. As you noted in your comments, we are recommending that the declaration of emergency be issued primarily for staffing needs that may arise between now and say the first of the year, given the rise of the positivity rate. Peter, is there anything else that you would want to add to this in terms of from your perch?
No, just to, this is identical to the emergency declaration that the village president issued at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. But that was let to expire when when things were not in a critical state, late spring and during the summer. But as Rob said, given where we are now and the spike in the restrictions, it seemed appropriate for these two purposes to have the village president execute it again, for only those two purposes. And unlike the other declaration that the village president did, which, as you remember, required the council to continually extend it every meeting, which got a little cumbersome at times. This one, I think we're recommending that the council immediately after the president signs it, if he signs it during this meeting, which I think he's planning to do, that the council then just moves that it continue until January 5th, 2021. At which point it will expire unless the council decides that it should continue.
Any questions for Peter or Rob? Any comments? Andy, you're muted. You're not muted. Yes, you are. Can anybody hear Andy?
We have to log back in.
Love the Zoom. So, anybody else for?
I have no comment. It seems pretty straightforward and
Okay, are you guys okay
through
the main
January
thing.
5?
Is there any reason not to do it? I mean, we don't know, given the facts that things are moving and moving in the wrong direction and things can change on a dime. Is there any reason not to do it?
No, this is something we should do. Just move on.
We're recommending it for the greatest flexibility with scheduling with staff, some of which are covered under collective bargaining. So I can't think of a reason not to do it. Trustee Lempier.
Okay. So
thank you.
Zoom is making this all complicated for me. So I signed this document that's in front of me. Is that correct, Rob?
Correct.
Do we need a motion, Rob?
Don't need a motion for the declaration. We need a motion to extend it to the recommended date of January 5th.
Wait a minute. but we're re-adopting it. It expired.
No, so you're not adopting it. This is a presidential proclamation. Does not get adopted. This is the president's stroke of a pen.
Got
But
it.
what the motion will be is to allow it to continue until January 5th, 2021.
Okay,
That's the motion that needs to be made.
I so move that the state of emergency be extended until the end of the January 5th, 2021 Village Council meeting.
Second.
Assuming we don't need any public input, I second that.
Thanks for reminding me. Anybody, please let's not go through this polling again.
Got to have a roll call vote.
I know, but John brings up a good point.
What's that?
Do we open this up for public comment?
Well, sure, just ask if anybody wants to comment. You don't have to go through everybody.
It's easy when you're in person, but now Kristen's got to work through this whole roll call list again. Go ahead.
So President Rentz, everyone who is in the meeting right now is attending through the Zoom platform. There's no callers. So what we could do, if you would like to, is ask that anyone who would like to comment, please use the Zoom platform to raise their hand.
Okay, you can ask that.
I like that.
Yeah.
So,
Andy's raising his hand.
So anyone who is in the audience previously recognized that would like to comment on this specific agenda item, please use the Zoom platform to raise your hand. There are no hands raised, President Rentz.
Yay. Okay, so we have public comment. There is none. We have a motion. We have a second. Rob,
Yes.
roll call vote.
Trustee Lampier,
Yes.
trustee Swerk,
Yes.
trustee Dearborn,
Yes.
trustee Apatow,
Yes.
trustee Caladarchi,
Yes.
trustee Kreip with a thumbs up. Thank you.
There you go. So is that legal enough, Peter?
Hey, Andy, try your headphones.
And Kristen will come and get it from you and get it certified and affidavit and everything. But yes, that's good.
Okay, good.
And I'm going to be replaced here by my colleague Ben Schuster in a moment, since you are all on an off night tonight. So I've got a regular meeting at the Lake Club. So I just didn't want to shock you when all of a sudden you had a new person.
Say hi to all my friends up there, Peter.
I shall.
Okay. Now I lost my sheet. Hold on.
You have friends, Chris?
Got a lot of friends.
I had a couple up there. All right, so that's done with. Item number 6, the stormwater program financing discussion. Here we go. This is what we're all getting together for on a Monday night anyway. I do have some opening comments, and just to kind of set the stage, two things. First of all, you know, this wasn't what I would call a huge packet from the standpoint of paper volume, but it certainly contains a lot of work that has evolved over a 5-year period for this particular project. And, you know, it was an amazing team effort to get it this far. Even if it doesn't go any further, I have to say that just the amount of work and the diligence and the intellect that was brought to the table was absolutely amazing. You know, I've done a lot of projects in my career, and I have to say that this project team, you know, Andy, Steve, Rob, Jim, Mike Waldron, I mean, everybody played just such a major role. And, you know, we wouldn't be looking at this tonight if it wasn't for the unbelievable amount of time and effort and back and forth that went into this thing. I could talk about that all night, because along with being a really important issue, it was also an amazing personal journey for me to witness and be a part of. And, you know, without all these people working together, we wouldn't be here talking about it tonight.
Hey, Chris, can I interrupt?
Oh, there you go, Andy.
Ah,
Yes, you
I didn't
can.
actually want to interrupt. I was actually asking, can I? It works. So, sorry, go ahead.
You want to read my prepared comments for me, Andy? That'd be great.
You're doing great.
Hey, Steve. Anyway, you know, I talked with Rob, and I had mixed emotions about really providing any sort of additional narrative on this and allow us to get right into the numbers. But Rob did remind me that, you know, at times, as painful as it may be, it's important to, you know, lay down a complete record. And, you know, we talked about it a fair amount and thought it would be a good point, if maybe not for those of us who have lived it for the last 5 years, for those of us who are new to the conversation here in the council and for those in the public, to just spend a couple minutes kind of running through, I won't call it a history lesson, but kind of the history of the process and how we got to where we are today. So bear with me as I work through this. All right, during this, oh, there we go. Oh, I forgot we had PowerPoint for me. There's a slide you're going to see that everybody's getting sick of, but I can't see enough of this.
I too have that hanging on my wall. It's a good one.
It's amazing. And it's from 1915. And the thing that, you know, I look at this often myself to remember that we're not dealing with just one event in 2011 or a couple of events in 2000. What was the one before that, Steve? 2008, 2000?
Yeah, 2008, 2011, 2013.
Those sleepless nights, right?
Yes.
But anyway, you know, the fact is this is a problem that has been plaguing this community for a long, long time. And while I get a chuckle out of this when I look at it, it also reminds me how long we've all been, you know, how long this community has struggled with this, with really making no significant progress. I guess, you know, there were some really interesting projects with the Skokie Lagoons and the like, but it really didn't solve the problem, at least not for residents here in the 21st century. You can go to the next slide. So today was when I was trying to think up what I was going to touch on. For the first time, I just had the inkling to get on the computer, and I encourage all of you to do this. Just Google Winnetka floods. And it is amazing the amount of press and storylines and history just by Googling those two words. It's amazing. And these came from one article that was written shortly after the 2011 flood. And it's really interesting, especially the one with the canoe, you know, this one over here on the left with the canoe and the guys cruising by the house there. The other ones were from, I think, 1929. There must have been a barn burner of a flood back then. And the color picture in the middle was, for those of you who weren't here, that was the receding waters from 2011, because it was far worse than that at the night before that picture was taken.
Chris, there's documentation of Carlton Washburn swimming from Crow Island School to his house over on Sunset Road. So there you go.
And then when he swam back, he landed in the spot that Cass Baker built his house on. So sorry, Cass, I couldn't resist. So anyway, now my formal comments. All right, during the summer of 2011, our village endured one of the most profound flooding events it has ever witnessed. While far from being an isolated instance, this one really seemed to raise community concerns to a whole different level. The water was everywhere, and it took days for the flood to recede. When it finally did, the piles of personal belongings stacked up on the curbs was staggering and far-reaching. I was there, I remember it, it was horrible. Later that year, Village Council sponsored a community meeting at the Winnetka Community House that filled the auditorium beyond capacity. I was on council at that time, and people were angry and frustrated, and they demanded action. As I was doing this little internet search, I stumbled across a quote that our Public Works and Village Engineer director gave to the local news outlet. And if Steve Saunders wasn't some sort of forward-viewing sage at this time, I don't know who is, but the quote was, "We need to vigorously pursue open space for detention. This is not a piping solution. This is a detention solution. What the village decides," and then it goes on to say, "what the village decides and where it finds rainwater detention space with New Trier High School, the Cook County Forest Preserve, and the Winnetka Park Districts as top choices are just two of many questions that remain unanswered." So back in 2011, Steve stepped up and told everybody that we really had a storage problem. Interestingly enough, at that time, Village Council decided that they wanted to do a piping project, and they then moved forward on this tunnel project that we've all come to understand was elegant in its conception, and it had some really interesting aspects to it, but it was clearly not the process that was necessary to bring a major project of this sort to fruition. The real problem at that point was, up to that point, none of those property owners, New Trier, Park District, District 36, the Forest Preserve, showed any interest in sharing their properties to help mitigate the problem. I know Steve knocked on doors at that time, and he wasn't getting any welcome answers. So at that time, council elected to pursue, as I said, a technically elegant, but socially and politically impossible strategy to take the water to the lake. Regretfully, village leadership was so intent on doing something that they ignored key and critical aspects of vetting that possibility and forged ahead without regard for good process and financial prudence. 4 years were wasted pursuing that idea, and thankfully, when sanity finally returned to the council in the form of Andy Kripe and Scott Meyer, we found ourselves back at square one. Cognizant of the commitment made to the community, in 2015, Village Council commissioned Strand to create a framework or vision for how to best achieve modern day storm protection that didn't include dumping filthy water into the same lake we draw our drinking water from. Strand was instructed to ignore the politics and ownership issues, as at that point, council simply wanted to know what might be feasible. Community workshops ensued that surveyed residents' observations and experiences, and in early 2016, Strand and Associates presented its findings to the community. Fundamentally, their vision contemplated huge open water storage facilities at the Cook County Forest Preserves, Duke Childs Field, and Crow Island Woods, and depositing water into the Skokie River once river levels had subsided. For the first time in history that I know of, the village finally had a framework for something that could actually work. Even more promising, their budget of $60 million garnered widespread community support. Unlike the tunnel process, it was clear to me and my colleagues that any successful implementation should be pursued in a methodical and logical process that did not include wasteful spending on design and consultants unless completely necessary to facilitate conversation and negotiation. The overall plan, and I mean as far as an action plan for village council and staff, was to start at the river and work our way upstream, understanding that if we didn't secure the downstream access, it would be a waste of time and money to seek upstream agreements and design elements that could never find its way to the river. Unlike the tunnel, and despite our desire as a council to do something, we took a different tack. Instead of running around like a bunch of chickens with their heads chopped off, we stuck to the plan and began the hard work of negotiating with the Forest Preserve and subsequently with New Trier, the Winnetka Park District, and District 36. Sorry, guys. It was a slow, sometimes contentious, and very tedious. Every time we were pushed to make a change that forced a deviation from our original budget, we went back, had Strand rerun the numbers to ensure we weren't straying too far off the mark and keeping us focused on the cost as well as the outcome. In short, we acted like private sector developers, keeping money and design in workable balance. From the beginning, it became clear that substituting underground storage for open water was going to come with a price tag, but we kept that in mind as we negotiated and found offsets for much of what we added. We pressed on more efficient methodology for each piece, just like the private sector would. Additionally, rather than relying on engineers' estimates, we sought the assistance of private sector in vetting cost estimates. By enlisting the services of practitioners, people who actually do this work for a living, to review the project and its costing assumptions, we have a higher confidence level in our budgets, making our conversations tonight more meaningful. I will say this, even though that we were taking a more private sector approach, the one thing that's important is, we never forgot, and thank goodness for Steve and Rob and Mike Waldron from that standpoint. We had to remember we were still operating in a governmental environment, even though the project was the same pipes you'd use on a subdivision as in something like this. So there was a real understanding that we had to still navigate through a governmental system while still trying to make sure that our process was true to the cost constraints that the community bought into when the project was first presented. Recall the stakes of the tunnel, and this is the key thing. It started out at an initial budget of 38 million and ended up somewhere north of 100 million before council finally pulled the plug on it. Most important,
I'm with you, Chris. I think that's a very important, that the process actually worked very well. Combination of pulling the plug. It was really a combination of a lot of people in the community with you trying to push back. Otherwise, we would have had that. So I give everyone a lot of credit, including the community.
Everybody. It was a huge. But the important thing was that we began to track the public benefit. It came clear that Andy and I would talk about this a lot. That as we're negotiating these contracts, we came to understand that most of the work we were doing would benefit the other taxing body as well for plans that they had in the pipeline simultaneous with us. And it became a real rallying cry to see how much we could actually double our money, if you would, or get a twofer out of it. Everybody else had projects in the pipe trying. New Trier had the ball fields. They have a huge program of upgrading their athletic facilities. It was already in the making for years. The Park District had already been looking at golf course improvements, and they were also interested in adding a new skating shelter. Anytime you build a new structure, particularly in these areas, you've got extensive stormwater mitigation that you have to deal with. D36 for their expansion at Crow Island Field would have also been required to use public money for stormwater retention there. And in the end, these ancillary benefits total over $8 million in money each of our partners would ask the same taxpayers for as they move towards their own capital improvement plans. So we actually doubled the value on that $8 million because we're spending it for our project, but they're also getting the benefit of it to the tune of $8 million. So what we have before us this evening is a financial plan that has been carefully assembled and vetted. We aren't seeking to legislate anything at this point, but we as a council do need to focus on two important components if we're going to move this towards implementation. The first one, and actually the two questions that are on the table today for my colleagues here, is number one, is the proposed budget acceptable? And secondly, is the capital stack or the sources that we've assembled to finance the project workable and acceptable? It's important to recognize that we have made significant progress in identifying sources of grant and other outside resources. I personally believe we've assembled sufficient funding to greenlight the project and begin real work. At the earliest, the $5.5 million in unidentified funds will not be needed until 2024 at the earliest. There are still quite a few stones we haven't turned yet, and I can assure you that I will do all I can to find the balance in the coming years. We haven't even started conversations with the feds, and other local opportunities are out there to pursue. MWRD, there's all sorts of infrastructure grants floating around out there, and staff is charged with keeping an eye on those and submitting every chance we get. But make no mistake, if council believes that we have enough flesh on the bones tonight to move forward, there's still a lot of hard work to do. And I, for one, am ready for it if you are. So with that, I will turn over the conversation to our presentation team. I think, Steve, you're going to kick things off tonight. Is that right?
Yep.
Great. Hi.
Well, good evening, President Rintz and trustees and community members. I want to briefly walk through a little bit of additional detail behind what President Rintz just summarized with respect to the current cost estimate for the stormwater program. And the slide that you have in front of you has a lot of numbers on it, but I'll try to simplify it as best I can. Basically, this is a rolled up of the detailed cost estimates that we have for each portion of the project. And I'd like to first focus on the two left-hand columns that say 2020 baseline reference. And what that is, the left-hand column of that is original vision. That was the estimate of cost that Strand Associates put together using 2015 dollars for the program that they developed at that time. And all of those detailed estimates rolled up to a total project of just under $61 million. Including about $3.1 million in Forest Preserve fees for using their property. One of the important things to keep in mind with these preliminary cost estimates is that they did carry some fairly high design contingencies based on the preliminary level of engineering, not having soil borings, not having a lot of detailed utility information. So we were carrying some fairly significant contingency numbers. But as I mentioned, those were 2015 era cost estimates. And unfortunately, one of the kind of truisms in the construction industry is things don't generally get cheaper to construct. Because labor and material prices pretty much always trend upward. So if we were to simply advance that program as Strand originally designed it, using construction inflation that's taken place over the last 5 years, the cost estimate for that project as originally envisioned back in early 2016 is more like $70 million, just based on construction inflation. And I'll go through a little bit about how we came up to that number shortly. But that's really kind of the comparison that should be used when we look at the current cost estimates. So if we look then at the next two columns that say 2020 project estimates, the left-hand column of those two columns represents Strand's estimate of cost for the project as it stands today, with the significant changes that we had to make to the preliminary vision in conjunction with our partner agencies to take into account their various land use plans, program plans, expansion plans, basically the fruit of the negotiation that allowed us to create these storage projects on property that we don't own in a way that was beneficial to the village, but also beneficial to these other agencies. And most of those changes in cost are related to the storage projects and the fact that most of that storage on Duke Childs Field, some of the storage on Park District property and District 36 property was driven underground to facilitate those agencies still being able to use their facilities while the village can use those properties to store underground. As President Rintz mentioned, what's not covered in these numbers is the sort of twofer that as we design these projects, they're also providing regulatory detention to accommodate the stormwater management needs that would need to be constructed as these other agencies bring their projects to permitting status. So that drove the project cost in 2020 dollars using Strand's estimates to just over $76 million, which means about $6.5 million or so of increased cost, almost entirely attributable to driving what was originally intended to be surface level open water storage underground into designed concrete storage vaults below ground. So when we got that number back, as President Rintz mentioned, one of the things that we wanted to do was to, similar to what we did with the tunnel project, was to proof those cost estimates in the actual construction market, to look at the plans, look at the scope, make sure that the unit prices that were used were reflective of the conditions in the market, make sure that the projects were constructible, that there weren't going to be any kind of difficult construction penalties that would result in increased costs. And so we engaged a construction contractor, heavy civil excavation contractor, to go through the detailed cost estimates and the plans and see to what extent there were any differences that should be accounted for. And so basically the upshot is that all of the cost estimates that Strand prepared were very much in the ballpark with the current construction market. Berger did note with a couple of the underground storage projects that there were going to be some different backfill requirements that add a little bit to the cost of the Crow Island storage and to the underground storage at Duke Childs in the Park District. So their estimate was more like $78.1 million. And then the final step, the rightmost column that's outlined in red, is the proposed budget that we're recommending for the project. And really the difference between those numbers reflects advancing the engineering and being able to reduce the design contingency that was being carried. When when Strand put together their initial cost estimates, they were carrying 30% contingencies across the board. The storage projects, we've spent the better part of 5 years refining and designing those to the point that we know what's underground, we know the utilities that are there, we know we had soil borings taken in some of these locations, we know what we're getting into. So we actually reduced the contingency. We're still carrying a hefty contingency of 10% on the storage projects. And then with some of the advanced work that we were able to do in the conveyance projects, we were able to reduce those contingencies from 30% to 25%. And so we're recommending a project budget for the program of 75.7 million, which is about 7% above where we started in 2020. And again, that's almost entirely attributable to the negotiated changes that we had to make to allow co-location of underground storage facilities on these parcels of land that were owned by other governmental agencies. Kristen, if you can move to the next slide. So this illustrates how we calculated the cost escalation. We looked at several different indices for civil and heavy construction from the Federal Highway Administration. The Bureau of Reclamation carries an index for heavy civil for dams and water storage impoundments and hydroelectric work. The NHCCI is the National Highway Construction Cost Index. The BONS is a composite index for non-structural heavy civil work like pipelines, but that's more on the producer side. So that measures inputs like labor and materials and supplies. And then we calculated an average, it was about 16.1% between 2015 and 2020. And that escalation worked out to about $10 million. One of the important things, again, to keep in mind with just about every market is it's very rare over a long period of time that construction prices go anywhere but upward. And so that's kind of the trend that we see here. And to some extent, what you could expect perhaps going forward as well. The next slide shows the project as it stands now. The first three projects, the Forest Preserve, Duke Childs Field, Park District Storage, those reflect all of the storage work essentially west of Hibbard Road. So that includes reconfiguring the landfill with the excavated soil, which is saving us a considerable sum of money as opposed to trucking all of that material off, the underground storage, and the two golf course projects. Hibbard Road and the tree streets are those pipes shown in blue. Those are the conveyance pipes to get the water to the storage facilities. Just building the storage facilities by themselves would provide minor benefit to some of the areas of town, but without building pipes to get the water to those facilities, we're really not realizing much, especially south of Willow Road, because of the bottlenecks in the piping system. And then the south of Willow Road projects are shown there in green, and then the remaining conveyance projects going up farther north and farther east. And then a separate line item of $1.4 million that's for various green projects where we can fit rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavements, things like that, to both provide a water quality benefit and some limited additional detention, but primarily a water quality benefit to meet our commitments to the Forest Preserve as part of the discharge of additional stormwater to that facility. And that totals up to about $75.7 million for the entire suite of projects. And I think Tim is
I think I got this one,
taking it
Steve.
from here. You got it, Rob? Okay.
Chris, do you want us to finish the slide deck before we take questions?
You're muted.
Okay, I'll keep going then. So as outlined in your packet, we have identified the source of funds that we believe are apparent to move the project forward. I want to start with, what are the balances? What are the funds that are on hand? And if you begin with the stormwater fund, we've noted that there's approximately $16 million in the stormwater utility fund, of which 15.6 million would be allocated for the capital build. Those have been funds that reflect general fund transfers, stormwater utility fees, and bond proceeds. From there, we have been saving money in the general fund over a period of time to pay for long-term infrastructure projects such as stormwater. And we are recommending that $11 million of excess fund balance be allocated towards the project. In addition, after taking a closer review of the MFT fund, we've identified 2.8 million of accumulated fund balance from MFT that would be eligible for stormwater projects, infrastructure projects such as this. And so that when you add all those together, we have approximately $29.4 million of cash on hand to begin the project, which interestingly is pretty darn close to the cost projections for all the storage projects. Next, I want to talk about the capital bill that was approved by the Illinois legislature in the spring of this year. After several years of aggressively pursuing our legislators, particularly Robin Gable, she was successful in securing appropriations in the Rebuild Illinois Fund. $12 million is allocated for the Cook County Forest Preserve site. And that amount of funding has been confirmed with her for that site, and is identified from her perspective as a regional project, which is exactly what it is. It's multiple units of government coming together to solve a problem for the greater area. We also received $16 million in grant funds for our projects in general. That gets us to $28 million of funding from the state of Illinois. We have asked Representative Gable to prioritize these funds, and you'll see in the cash flow analysis, we're looking at disbursements potentially in 22 and 2023. Moving on from there, we've also identified an annual operating general fund balance transfer of $4 million. This represents recent reconfiguration of some pension funding savings as a result of the consolidation bill. That runs out for approximately 4 years and takes us through 2025. There's also debt capacity created from the recent bond refunding, which is identified at $7.5 million. Since that time, also approximately about a year or two ago, we received $500,000 from the MWRD. We do anticipate pursuing additional grant requests from that entity. And also in terms of a grant, we received Build Illinois funds through the MFT allocation of $803,000 that we expect to receive in the near future. As you total all those up, we have identified a potential funding, unidentified funding of about $5.5 million. Can we go to the next slide? This is just a bar chart that shows the varying funding levels and where it's coming from. The state grants, the cash on hand, and then of course the $5.5 million identified there to the far right. Next slide. We also wanted to share with the council potential funding sources that we plan to continue to pursue. Two of these that I think really hold some potential, and these are the FEMA pre-disaster mitigation grant we've noted these conservatively, but they could be more funding available than what's been noted here. But the pre-disaster mitigation grant and the flood mitigation assistant grant, both I think are grant programs that we would want to be pursuing early in 2021. Like I said before, additional MWRD grants as we move forward with the additional phases of the project we would certainly be aggressively looking for funding there. President Rintz noted that we would still be going after federal infrastructure spending. If there's a federal infrastructure bill, we think there are opportunities to potentially get funding from that source. And then as you look at a couple of the top items there, the reclassification of the Army Corps permit to a regional permit from an individual permit could save us approximately $1 million in construction and permitting costs. The Willow Road jurisdictional transfer project that was explained during the recent budget meeting, we believe there's about $500,000 there that could be allocated towards rebuilding the intersection at Hibbard and Willow. So you can see there's plenty of opportunities to pursue additional funding, and I believe we'll be going after those with vigor over the next couple of years. Next slide. Okay, Tim, I think you've got it from here.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. So we're just moving on into more details of the actual financial plan. Presented in the packet, we had included a comprehensive 5-year financial look to get this project funded. So starting here, we have the operating revenue up at the top, and that's the existing stormwater service revenue plus other income, which is primarily interest and investment earnings, and in total operating income throughout the 5 years of the plan, which is from 2021 through 2025, of about $2.1 million per year. And this covers the operating expenses, which consists of salaries and benefits, services and supplies, and then our existing debt service. And you can see if you look through the years in between 21 and through 2025, we had the existing debt service, that was the 2013 bonds and the 2014 bonds in 2021, which were then refinanced this year in 2020. So starting in 2021 throughout 2025, you see the existing debt service principal and interest for the 2020 bonds coming in, and that refinancing saved annual debt service. And then in 2025, the financial plan relies on issuing funds, potentially a future bond issuance of $7.5 million in 2024. So you can see in 2025, the additional $528,000, that's the existing debt service capacity that was freed up from that refunding. So I know it's a lot of numbers being thrown out and trying to piece through it, but overall, operating revenue minus operating expenses is what, net operating income of the fund, and this is the amount that we make available for the capital plan. So at the bottom of the sheet, we have the stormwater, the 5-year capital plan, the revenue side of it. So this is where we're layering in all those revenue sources that Robin mentioned over the 5 years of the plan. So we start off at the top of the stormwater utility. This is the annual operating income available for the plan as well. And then in 2021, we have the MWRD grant of $500,000. The state capital money, the Forest Preserve portion of $12 million coming in 2022, and then the Winnetka portion in 2023, and then the $1 million a year in the annual general fund operating transfer beginning in 2022 through 2025. And then we layer in the accumulated general fund transfer in 2023 and 2024. That's the $11 million in accumulated general funds. And finally, the Rebuild Illinois funds, that the $803,000, that would be between 2021 and 23. And then the 2.8 MFT fund transfer in 2024 and 25. And then the future bond issuance of $7.5 million in 2024. Again, this represents the existing debt service capacity. So before we did the refunding exercise, the village was paying about $1.3 to $1.35 million in annual debt service payments. After the refinance, that number dropped down to approximately $800,000, freeing up about $500,000 in annual debt service capacity. And that capacity is able to support a $7.5 million bond issuance in 2024, should we not be able to to find additional revenue sources going forward from some of the grant opportunities that were presented. And then finally, the unidentified funding source mentioned in 2025 of $5.5 million. So at the bottom line is the subtotal income. We have the operating revenue over operating expenses, and then plus these what I'm calling capital revenue sources. These are one-time revenue sources, not recurring through grants and intergovernmental revenues. Slide. So now we're moving on to the expense side. So this is the 5-year stormwater financial plan, the capital improvement side that Steve went through, broken out in a little different format. So it's broken out by year. It's color coded to indicate the projects, the different components of the project, and it's layered in over, again, the 5-year period from 2021 through 25. So up at top, we have the County Wetland Landfill Project in 21-22, the Duke Child Storage and Landfill Projects in 21 and 22 as well, and then the Parks District Storage Projects with engineering in 21, and then the capital portions in 22-23. Hibbert Conveyance between 22 and 23, the Tree Street Conveyance between 22 through 24, and then the South of Willow Road Storage and Conveyance between 2022 to 2024. And then the Hibbert Road North Conveyance Projects in 23-24, the Upstream Conveyance Projects in 24 and 25, and then various green infrastructure improvements between 23 and 25. And then the bottom section here in green, so we have this $75.7 million comprehensive stormwater project that we're trying to kick off, but we also recognize we need to have some funding available for other capital as it may arise and other capital improvements throughout the remainder of the village. So this green section identifies $1.43 million in other capital spending that's outside the main capital project that we've discussed so far. So in total, we have annual capital improvements at the bottom there shown $6.167 million in 2021, increasing to $22.6 million in 23, and then about $10 million in spending in 25 at the end of the 5-year period. And then at the very bottom of this section was the cash flow, which now we've switched to a summary view of the actual cash flow. So this cash flow here, again, for the 5-year plan, we have the beginning cash up at top, contribution from operations, minus the debt service for a net annual funds available for capital. Other sources of income, these are those one-time capital revenue sources from the intergovernmental, from the state of Illinois and intergovernmental grants that we're pursuing. And then the total funds available towards capital, and then a summary of the entire capital program to get to an ending cash balance. So I guess the key highlight here is throughout the 5 years of the plan, ending cash balance never dips below the minimum policy requirements. And cash on hand at the very end of the plan in 2025 still exceeds the policy minimum. Fine. So a question that might come up would be, you run the capital plan, everything goes as planned in 2025. What happens after the 5 years? What happens in 2026? So in years 2026 through 2030, so basically the next 5 years, we would expect that revenue in the stormwater fund to be flat. Beginning in 26, operating expenses we expect to decrease by 3 to 3.5%. This will be due to a reclassification of personnel as the project is completed. So total operating costs during this period, on average, will increase by approximately 1% between 2026 and 2030. That might sound low 10 years out to have costs increasing by 1%, but that's largely due because the operating costs will consist of debt service, which will be about 55 to 65% of total operating costs, depending on that potential future debt issuance in 2025. And as obviously the debt service costs are fixed in nature, and with them comprising a big chunk. That's why the total operating would be about 1% in those out years. Other operating costs will be salaries and benefits and services and supplies, and obviously system maintenance. With the project between 21 and 25, after that, there's going to be some operations and maintenance costs related to upkeep on that project on an annual basis, but those costs should be minimal, with the exception of every 5 to 6 years, we'll need to perform sediment removal in the underground storage tanks, which could be as high as about $50,000 in cost. So we will have flexibility in terms of managing stormwater costs beyond the initial 5-year financial plan. So in 2026 to 2030, the annual net operating income is going to total about $70,000 to $140,000 a year. Additional flexibility for revenue could come from capture of additional ERUs due to continued build out. And what that is as the village grows, as people put additions on houses or new construction that has a larger footprint than the existing construction, the number of ERUs in the village grows slightly each year. So that the amount of stormwater revenue, even though we project it flat, we do expect it to increase slightly just from this growth of the village. And phase out of the stormwater project manager position upon completion of the project. That's where I referenced earlier. We would see savings of about 3 to 3.5% a year in operating costs. And then potential transfers from the general fund for annual capital requirements. So the $1 million a year between 2021 to 2025, there's potential transfers from the general fund going forward beyond that if necessary. And then finally, future grants and intergovernmental revenue sources. Again, we continue over the next 5 and into 10 years to be looking for those future grant opportunities. Slide. So the next steps in the West Southwest Winnetka Stormwater Program, a summary is $75.7 million. We've identified funding sources for 92.7% of this program. We've identified potential future funding opportunities for the remaining $5.5 million that we don't have a program for at this point. We will continue with detailed financial plans with adequate cash flows, which we believe demonstrate the ability to move forward with this project. In the 2021 capital plan, we've programmed $6.2 million for stormwater system improvements. Of this, $5.2 million is dedicated towards the West Southwest Winnetka Stormwater Program. And finally, the $75.7 million program will be included in the village's 5-year capital improvement plan.
Okay, thanks guys, I really appreciate that. All right, council, here's what I'd like to do. If you have questions of the presenters, let's do that now. Then I'd like to turn to the public. Let's hear what the folks in the audience would like to share with us. And then we can come back and have a more general discussion on the project and work towards answering, those 2 critical questions. A, is the budget acceptable? And B, is the sources and uses that's been presented here acceptable in order to decide whether or not we want to move this to the next level or not. So at this point, questions for the staff. We also have Mike Waldron here if you want to get into the weeds on any of the engineering stuff as well.
Chris, I don't have any questions because I've lived it for the last 6 years, but I did also, everything you said and thanking everybody. When Scott and I came on 6 years ago, we had an outstanding staff, but a challenging situation. And it really has been great working with the staff, with Strand. I mean, you guys have been outstanding. Steve, Rob, the whole team. Chris, Scott and I, we were a little lonely for a while. And that improved. And when you came on,
and Penny,
a lot of credit. I think, what people need to understand about this whole thing, and I think that was so daunting, is it's such a large, complex thing. Having somebody with kind of a developer mindset who can envision the next step towards the possible, it's been invaluable. And, we've run through all the numbers, but I wanted to point out one other stark thing for everyone to think about with these numbers. When at $105 million project that was continuing to go upwards and people were willing to spend money to fight. Right now, what you're looking at is a project, 75 million, but really 28 million is being paid by the state of Illinois. 8 million is getting double duty. So you back 35 million out of that of value, and residents are really going to be out of pocket 40 million versus 105 million. That's a $60+ million swing. And that happened because of a lot of people pulling together. We've got some great people in some of the other boards. I think of Warren James in particular, he frustrated a lot of Chris and I with some of his ideas. Some of those ideas made this really, really good. And so he deserves credit for that. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, is just thank you. It's been fun working with you all. You guys deserve a gold star. If you have a web page and you want a village endorsement, sign me up. But that's all I had to say. Back, I know you all probably have some questions.
Penny, I see you waving your hand.
Yes, I'm waving my hand. I would, first an observation, then I have some detailed questions. But I've been watching this for, again, I was on the council 20 years ago, I'm the old curmudgeon here, but I've been watching this project the problem for a long time. And as a person who has a public policy background, this to me is the kind of work we need to be doing, because it solves a myriad of problems, not just one problem, and it's working together with all the different stakeholder groups in the community. So I know it took an amazing amount of work to get here, and I hope this serves as a model for our work going forward, because it's through working really hard to have cooperation amongst all of our taxing bodies that we get a really good product. And this is environmentally sound. I mean, we're moving ahead. We're not just, staying in the same place. And we're providing some really great recreational opportunities. And anyway, I could go on, but I just want to say, from the big picture, this is amazing. And not only that, but the financial plan that you all have been able to come up with is creative, and it's sound because it comes from a number of places, not just one funding source. And I know it took a lot of work to get the different sources and to really think about it. And it's a long-term solution. You guys have been working on it for a while in terms of what do we need to save, what can we do? But from the bottom of my heart, from somebody who lives in the floodplain as well as a trustee, thank you. And now I have some detailed questions, but fundamentally where I'm going with all of this is I want to be sure that not only do we have a great solid plan that we already have, but what's our contingency plan in case one particular funding piece goes awry, and then do we have a backup to our backup plan? So I just want to make sure that residents feel really secure that we've got this all, all soundly funded, and they can feel good about it, because I sure do. Anyway, so I had some questions about just wanting to clarify on our charts in terms of which are the pieces that are the projects when you're looking at the 5-year plan. What is the part that is to take care of the first flush problem, and then what is it that is the piece to finance unanticipated future stormwater problems, if that question makes sense? So looking,
I think the technical piece we'll toss over to Steve or
It's these, it's attachment C, but I'm not sure. Wait a minute, it's attachment C. Yeah, that has 2 pages. So the first page of attachment C. So there are green infrastructure and mitigation zone and neighborhood scale stormwater improvements. I think I have a sense, but I want to make sure I'm right and anybody else who's looking at this understands it as well. So the question is, which is the pot of money for taking care of the cleaning the first flush that goes into our system and then out to the forest preserve? And then which is the pot of money that would be used for future stormwater projects that we don't know about right now?
Sure. So I can take the answer, I think, to both of those. So the way that we've designed the system to meet the requirements that the Forest Preserve gave us for water quality is we basically are capturing a known volume and treating it before it hits Forest Preserve property.
Correct.
The primary way that we're doing that is through sediment removal in the way that we've designed the storage, the underground storage structures.
Correct.
Where there's a sump built into that.
Right.
And that gives us most of our water quality volume for water quality control.
Right.
The distributed green infrastructure projects are those portions of this overall stormwater management program that contribute to water quality for the Forest Preserve runoff. So that's the $1.4 million that's
Got it.
built into 2023, 24, and 25.
Got it.
The mitigation zones, those are areas in the western and southwestern drainage area that are really outside kind of the scope of where the pipes and the conveyance improvements.
So those orphan areas, like the orphan areas?
Yeah, so those are either technically in the watershed, but isolated areas way upstream, or things that are going to require some additional mitigation because of the way that certain properties are too low or things like that. And so those are for areas as they kind of pop up. And then we have the neighborhood scale drainage improvements to provide some flexibility as a neighborhood comes up that's outside the project area. If there's a particular intersection, like if you recall our friends by Chestnut and Cherry Street,
right,
that were experiencing all of that flooding. And we were able to address that with a very targeted project in conjunction with a street rehabilitation program. And so we have some flexibility built in for those kinds of things. And then the other piece that's built into the project or into the capital plan in 2021 is looking at areas outside of the watershed to understand what may be needed for areas, say on the east side of Green Bay Road or things like that, for stormwater improvements.
So that's the 180,000 in
180,000 that's
Got it.
contained in
Okay.
2021.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the clarification on that. Then moving to looking at the possible funding sources or the identified funding sources from the state. Wondering when we will get notified of that, and if there is, things are just kind of uncertain these days, and if there's any slippage in terms of when the funds are allocated to us. Do we have a backup plan for how we make that cash flow work?
Sure. So we recently spoke with Robin Gable and requested that these funds be on a priority distribution. She thought that our schedule sounded reasonable. So we would expect, based upon our planning purposes, that it would be available to, as we've laid it out. If there is a delay, we could, of course, look to short-term financing in anticipation of those funds being received. But given the varying funding sources that were laid out in the memo from the Rebuild Illinois, we would have a very good expectation that these funds are going to materialize, because it's not related to the income tax bill.
Right.
It's not just gaming. It has a myriad of funding sources, and we would expect to be in that distribution from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity.
Okay, well, I just want to be sure that we have a backup plan in place, because, funny things happen these days. Again, it's not that it won't happen, but if there's a delay, how do we go about doing stopgap funding for a year or two?
Sure. Tax anticipation warrants or notes are short-term financing tools in anticipation of receiving revenues. Park districts and school districts use them a lot more often than municipalities do, but they are available to kind of bridge a gap. And then, of course, in the meantime, we're going to continue to pursue other grant funding opportunities that may come in at varying times. But I think that, based upon our research of the capital bill, we feel pretty good that this revenue is going to materialize. The question is going to be, will it materialize in alignment with the schedule that we've laid out?
Right.
And based upon our discussions thus far with DCEO and Representative Gable, we believe that to be the case.
Okay. Well, again, I know you wouldn't have presented it if you didn't feel pretty solid about it, but I just want to make sure that we, as I said, have a backup plan for that. I have other questions, but I'll let other people jump in.
Sure.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
All right, real quick question. Again, I concur with Andy's comments, and all of staff and consultants all have done a great job. It's come a long way. Try to keep it simple. One quick question for Steve Saunders. Attachment A, where you have the baseline references and project estimates. What is the designation of the green area? They totally match your 2020 estimate versus the Burger. What's the sense for the green?
Sure. So the cells that are shown in green on that attachment, basically that reflects Strand's current estimate with basically concurrence from Burger Construction. In other words, Burger didn't go back through and kind of build a new cost estimate from the ground up. Simply because of the level of details with the preliminary plan. So those cells that are highlighted in green on that spreadsheet just reflect the fact that Burger went through the estimates looking at kind of a broad constructability perspective and the unit prices that Strand was using. And kind of gave the blessing on that was reflective of market pricing, and there was nothing in those projects that made them go like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So,
plus, it's probably easier. It's all a lot of it is just piping too, which is nice.
Right.
All right. So the next question is my last question probably. From the 2015 to escalated to 2020, obviously we saw an increase. In our current estimate, how are those increases established from 2020 through 2023, 24, 25? Is that taken into account escalation of construction costs?
No, everything in the current plan going forward is in 2020 dollars.
Okay, so we need to keep that in mind, that it may not be as low as it is today, 2 or 3 years out as it gets bid.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I had.
Next.
Well, I guess I'll jump in, Chris, if I can.
Sure.
This is a great plan. I mean, engineering wise, we've all followed it. Yeoman's work, and it's enormous infrastructure spend for the village, but something that is obviously needed, as Chris, you pointed out, for the last 100 years or so. So kudos to getting this to this point. And, I kind of concur with Penny a little bit. I think the financing plan, if it can be executed and so on, looks terrific. We're not increasing direct cost, if you will, to residents, which is, I don't think a couple of years ago that was probably anticipated. And a lot of that has to do with the funding from the state, which is, a third of the whole thing. So, very, very important. So it's, if this can be, if this can come together as presented, that's a huge win-win for this town. There's no question about it. So, but having said that, I'd like to just probe some of the contingencies if we can, just a little bit further. And Rob, you touched on them a little bit. And I did look at the Rebuild Illinois bill. Have they stated when they plan to issue these tax-free bonds to finance this whole thing?
Tim, did you?
I have not seen where they've come out with a definitive date of when they're going to be issuing bonds. I think they will be doing it in multiple tranches, but I haven't seen anything specific to Winnebago's funding or specific projects.
Well, I think we should make inquiry on that. I think we should find out. I mean, we're planning on, 12 million in 2022 being granted. The bill contemplates, that this is all paid or reimbursed from the proceeds of taxes and bonds by the state. So the state, let's face it, we all love Illinois, land of Lincoln, but the state is in not the greatest of financial conditions. So I think, Tim, if you could find out what the timing is anticipated on those bonds, that would be good to know. And on the bond issue itself, on the grants, the 16 million, and I don't understand some of this legalese stuff, but the 16 million is dedicated to the village of Winnetka. That's very clear. The 12 million dedicated to Cook County Forest Preserve for costs associated with stormwater. How is that directly linked to the Winnetka project, to our parcel of the Forest Preserve?
In our discussions with Representative Gable, she was first successful in securing the 16 million for the village of Winnetka as a standalone to our village. In order to get a second allocation, she had to present it as a regional project in cooperation with the Cook County Forest Preserve. So we've had initial discussions with Commissioner Suffredin and Gable, and we'll be working out the disbursement or the allocation of that, but it is clearly intended for our project on the Forest Preserve site. And the $12 million takes into account not only the 10 point something that Steve has allocated for the site, but also some of the conveyance that is surrounding it to get it up to that $12 million number. So it is to be coordinated yet, but Robin Gable clearly said it was for us, and the Cook County Forest Preserve understands that as well.
Okay, is there anything, Rob, that, it's a mutual understanding is what you're saying. There's nothing that we can do to, Chris, do you have a point of view on that or not? To tie that directly to Winnetka?
Yes, all the money is for us.
It is?
Yes.
Okay, all right, if that's the case.
And Trustee Dearborn, going back to one of your earlier questions about the timing of the bond issue, we all know the state can be on a different schedule than how municipalities operate. But keep in mind, this bill was approved, early summer in anticipation of a July 1 state fiscal year. They're not on a calendar year like we are.
Okay.
So they're building this plan out. Of course, there's going to be some delays with COVID, but hopefully we'll be emerging through this. I would expect the bonding to be coming towards probably the third to fourth quarter of the state's fiscal year, at the current one that they're in now.
So next calendar Q2 21.
Yes, our calendar Q2. Yes, that's what I would expect, but I think, Tim can follow up and get more meat on the bone there.
The reason for that is, obviously we're looking for those funds in 2022. So, and then back on the state funding, and someone can hop it on me, but they disperse 25% at the outset, 75% upon the completion. That's 75% upon the completion of the scope of that work. And so that work would be done in 2022. We would expect the entire 12 million in calendar 2022, 16 million in calendar 2023 when that work is all completed. Is that?
Yeah, so the way grants have worked that I worked on in the past is that, yes, you get that 25%, but you're also making submittals along the way, and you're not accounting for it at the end. You're building that submittal as each section is completed, so that when you consider yourself substantively complete, you're submitting that request as early as possible. Does that make sense?
Okay, but it's a scope that 12 million is covering a certain scope, and that scope of that work is anticipated to be completed in 2022.
Right.
So it's not, some of that's not going to be done in 2024 or whatever. Right. It will all be done. We get the money. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And the one comment, I'm only bringing this up because it was put in the report, and obviously this is something, you know, that 28 million is critical, and maybe Ben Schuster can give us a legal comment on this. You know, based on all of this, the village arguably has an enforceable right to rely on the expenditure of the appropriation. I mean, I think that's a very strong statement, a very important statement to me. Ben, how would you characterize that enforceable right?
I mean, obviously we don't ever want to get there where, you know, that would not be the ideal situation, but, you know, the legislation was passed, and it's not as if, I would put it this way, it's not as if at this point it would be easy to take away. And more importantly, you know, the money was passed knowing that we will be taking expenses and taking an extreme amount of money is being put into this. So that's where kind of our right is generated from, is that we will be put in a much worse position. So there are various equitable options that we could pursue if we ever had to get that far. But I don't think that is really a significant risk at this point.
Okay, well, I give a lot of credit to Robin Gable on this. I mean, this is really quite an enormous grant for us, and it's terrific.
And
if I could just ask a couple other
Trustee
questions.
Dearborn,
Yep.
as we were drafting this memo, I did speak with her to make sure that we weren't speaking inappropriately based upon what she knew, and she concurred with everything that we put in this report.
Terrific. I mean, I think that she's fantastic. So on the contingencies, and maybe this is, Steve, you mentioned that the contingencies on this, and I don't understand how I'm not a construction guy, so you're going to put this out for bid. There's going to be well, maybe that's the first question. We go forward now. What are the next steps? We put this out for bid to contractors. We get these back anticipating figures in line with what we're talking about. And we know that when, Steve, when do we?
But so you don't know the actual cost, obviously, until you get bids back. But the way the purpose of contingencies is to guard against exactly that. You think you got an estimate, and then you get a number back, and you don't have any flexibility. And the way that contingencies work is as you progress through the process, and you develop more detailed design. You go farther along and you know exactly what utilities have to be relocated. You're moving money from the contingency into particular line items as you develop certainty on those line items. So that by the time you put a bid package out, you essentially have, you know, X units of pipe and X units of water main to be relocated, or X cubic yards of storage to be created. And the contingency goes down to essentially zero at that point. So the contingency is something that the village controls, and it's actually a sound construction budgeting technique to guard against unanticipated cost increases, sort of blowing the feasibility of the budget as you come across things. So that's kind of the way that works. And we felt comfortable, particularly on the storage side of things. Mike and his team have done enough work with the actual manufacturers of these precast underground storage units, where they've figured out the layout and how many units of each, and the soil borings that we've done on site, that we felt comfortable at this point on those projects, reducing those contingencies down to a 10% level, not as much on the upstream conveyance, which is why we're carrying a higher number.
So when do we go out for bids to the contractors subsequent to this meeting? When would we know that the scope of this project cost-wise is in line with, actual versus budget?
So the way that you would go through that is you'd award contracts for the detailed engineering, like we've done on the Forest Preserve project with Strand. Strand produces 30%, 60%, 95%. The contingencies get adjusted as those projects get brought to 100% design. When you have a complete set of specifications and bidding documents and construction plans, that's when you put it out on the street to get competitive bidding. And so, for example, for the Forest Preserve project, the timeline that we have in Strand's contract would be putting the project out for bid in September of 2021. And so then we would get those bids back probably October. And then hopefully a year from now, you guys are having a meeting, getting ready to award a construction contract to start on that.
I see.
And so that's when you actually lock in. That's what the construction cost.
And to John Swerk's point, you're continually going through these bidding processes for the 2023 work and the 2024 work. That's to be, we won't know those actual numbers.
That's correct. As you award engineering and the engineering gets brought farther and farther along to detail, the contingency amount will shrink, and we'll have more certainty on what the actual units and costs are. But you don't ever really know what something's going to cost until you got a sealed envelope from the contractor that you open up, and then that's what it costs.
Bob, some of that contingency, Bob, some of that contingency,
yeah, go on, Chris,
is expected to be consumed by escalation. Much to John's question before, is
right.
When you're carrying a 25% contingency, part of that, the reason why, in my mind, it's still so high is because you are carrying some allowances for the fact that the pricing is going to go up just by virtue of time.
Yep, understood. The last thing I was going to mention for the moment here is, and Tim, I was the person that asked about the future stormwater cash flows and so on. I do think that it would be helpful, and I'm not asking for this right away, obviously, but if someone could put together a long-term pro forma for the stormwater fund, given what we know here, I think it would be, worth seeing. I mean, we're taking the stormwater fund down to bare bones, which of course that's what the money's here for, obviously. But we will have, all the bond financings and so on. We're going to have some increased costs. If we could just see sort of if there is a likelihood that the residents are going to experience some direct increases in their stormwater payments. I'd kind of like to see that.
We can certainly.
So that's what I have.
Put something together for that shows that. I mean, we've preliminarily, as presented, 2026 and through 2030, we're relying on existing service revenue to
right.
to get to those years. So we can map that out in a little more detail.
Yeah,
I'm kind of looking to map it out through what you think the bond maturities would be.
Yeah.
Through the bond maturity. Okay.
Right, and through at least through 2030, as we get down to more maintenance type, the more maintenance level, what that looks like. Thank you. That's a great suggestion.
So anyway, again, I just recap. I think that this plan is presented, you know, is elegant and solves a big problem, obviously. And if it can be accomplished, you know, per this presentation, you know, we're all winners on this. So good job on that.
Trustee Dearborn, Trustee Lampier, one comment about the years 26 through 30, when Tim had mentioned, you know, revenues, you know, exceeding expenses by $70,000 to $140,000. These are estimates that we're looking at, but certainly keep in mind that looks a lot from 20 years, 26 through 30, looks a lot like it had done just prior to the refunding.
Right.
Where it was about a net income of $100,000 to maybe $150,000 a year in the stormwater utility. It is a maturing utility, right? It's been around for 6 years. Our other utilities have been around for 100. It's being built and developed, but the cash flows, once we're done with the big projects, will start to revert back to the way it looked, you know, in prior years. Unless, of course, we got other projects that we'll layer in and we'll find funding sources for.
Right, but obviously as the operating cost becomes higher, just so that we and future councils have a sense of what that looks like. Yeah,
the operating costs are planned for sure.
Right, thank you.
Yep.
The last point I would make on this is, you know, this is reaping the benefits of having a very strong village from a financial perspective. I mean, this is, not all communities can do something like this. And so, you know, we're going to take a little bit of a hit, I guess, to our liquid position, but you build that up for something like this. And this has been planned for. You know, some of you have been around longer than the 4 years I have, but in the 4 years I have, you know, we've been constantly, as Rob, you pointed out, sort of putting money into the general fund to try to, you know, get this in preparation. And, you know, this is the kind of project that, you know, 50 years from now, this is you planned for. And, you know, we're very fortunate that this village can even talk about something like this. So, you know, good stewardship allows this to happen. So let's,
Rob,
hopefully.
Mr.
Anyway,
Apatow.
that's all I have.
Trustee Apatow, unmute yourself and talk to me.
He's still muted.
No, really, we'll talk to you. I was
There
talking
you
about. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate they're very good questions, and I'll try and be quick because of that. You asked a lot of what I was going to ask. You know, it's really interesting, Chris. I look back at this. I was dead set against the plan that was put in there before, that I fought against because I thought the old plan was ill-conceived, lacked imagination. I didn't believe the $40 million budget. I didn't believe the $70 million budget, and I'm not sure I believe the $110 million budget. And what's nice about this is that we all knew it was the problem. Just throwing money at the problem wasn't going to do it. This plan has imagination. This plan has, I think it's pretty reality-based. And I think all these questions are trying to make sure, and all the work that the village has done, you guys have done, I commend you on, because you're trying to really get to the bottom. And so that what I don't want is the taxpayers and the residents of Winnetka to have surprises. And I think the work that was done to try and pre-fund this was a tremendous amount of effort, and it will make this project work. And obviously, I won't belabor the questions that have been asked about the state of the state of the state. You know what? I don't want to go to. I would hate to go to dinner with my good friend who skips out on dinner when the bill comes. So obviously, and I know you guys are doing what you can to make sure that can never happen, because that would be bad. So I just want to say thank you, first of all. I think I'm as behind this program as I was against the first one, because this has imagination. It's the right thing for the village and the climate and the lake. Two, I want to make sure that as we look at this, I know we talked about contingencies. I just wonder if we have sequencing of contingencies in case some funding doesn't appear for some reason. So for instance, and I mentioned this before, will getting 75% of this project done, 80% cure, or 60% cure 89 or 90% of the water problem. Getting to that last, sometimes, as I look at a project, that last 10% of the project can get very expensive. So I'm just wondering if there are contingencies that we will look at in case some funding dries up, or we get the bulk of the benefit of this incredible project if we don't complete it to 100%. I'm just trying to be a pragmatist and making sure that we don't blow the budget going forward. And third and lastly, is there a way in our bidding to lock in cost where we bid it now, but we don't have cost creep, where we award jobs obviously we want the best bidders, but also where we can kind of guarantee that we don't get nickel and dime to death as a year or two goes by, that they can hold costs. And I'm not sure if that's doable, but I just wanted to throw it out there. So I don't know, there's some statements and some questions in there. I guess the first one is the contingencies about sequencing and how much of the, how much will be, if we get 80% of the project done, does it solve 95% of the water problems?
Steve, I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah, we've asked Strand to look into this, and from a big picture, there's really very little benefit to be gained, especially for areas south of Willow Road, without constructing pretty much all of the storage in the conveyance for south of Willow Road. We get some benefit from the storage in the Forest Preserve and Duke Childs Field for, say, the tree streets and going a little bit up Hibbard Road. But really to derive most of the benefit, you're probably looking at maybe 60 to 65 million investment out of the $75 million program.
Okay.
to get to the areas that everybody kind of is,
right.
is overall aware of. Hey, the flooding is really bad here, but Mike and his team are refining that. Hopefully we don't need to make those difficult choices, but
no.
there are ways to the way that we phased it, building the storage first from the bottom end, is really the only way that the project works technically. And then the choice is how fast you build the conveyance up into the neighborhoods. Okay. So Mike and his team are working on that, just so that we have kind of that understanding as we get to those future projects. With respect to bidding, really what your best defense against cost escalation is really good, solid bidding documents that put all of the factors that a contractor is going to encounter right up on the table, because what drives up cost in competitive bidding is the amount of risk in terms of unknown expenses that the contractor feels that they have to take on. And so that's why it's been kind of a delicate balance, a nice push and pull between myself and President Rintz about how much engineering to do at the appropriate time to develop the right amount of cost certainty for the phase that we're in. And when we get to the point of actually awarding a construction contract, you've basically done all of the engineering. But that's why we're carrying those contingencies, is that's a way of the village managing its own risk. But the idea then is that as you develop the construction documents, that amount of unknown essentially goes as close to zero as you can get it, so that neither party really has a significant risk for unknowns. As far as contingency against cost escalation, I think the way to do that really is in the way that you break down the contracts, so that if you break it down into individual pieces where the duration might be a year or 18 months or something like that, the contractor has enough certainty of what their labor and material inputs are going to be, that they're not sort of padding the project to guard against,
Right.
a new labor contract or some massive increase in the price of Portland cement or things like that. Whereas if you try to do this as a single contract that lasts over 5 years, now you're introducing that uncertainty again, and you're going to lose control over the cost. So that's how we would intend to manage this, is both in the way that we phase the engineering, the right amount of engineering at the right time, and breaking the contracts down so that you don't have an extended amount of kind of time escalation uncertainty built into one contract.
That's very helpful, Steve. And you can tell the amount of work you put into this. And it gives me a lot more confidence in the numbers, and should give the whole village a lot more confidence in the numbers that we are putting forth. And the fact that there's still a contingency of potential, if you sequence 10 to 12 to $15 million of, we're never going to be Arizona here, but if we can solve the problem, and it's good to at least you're thinking about it the same way we are. So that's great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Jack, anything from you?
Yeah, Rob Apatow now has me nervous about the state of Illinois living up to its bills.
Thank you. It took me to get through to you.
No, I just was thinking, what's a realistic estimate that we might have trouble that way? Because that would obviously be a significantly unpleasant event for the village. If the state of Illinois were to say, well, I know we made this promise, but we can't follow through on it. Is it a realist? Is there like a percentage, or is this so far out there that we don't have to, come up with a contingency now?
Rob Bahan has been the beneficiary in other communities of similar sorts of funding. So Rob, why don't you go ahead and weigh in on that?
So it's legislation that's been passed and signed into law. Okay. So, and it was done with it was put together with identified funding sources. Now, could there be delays? Yes. I have had grants similar from the state of Illinois that have come in on time, and sometimes they've been delayed. But I've never seen them not come through, because they're earmarked, the revenues are earmarked for either the bonding or pay as you go. So when you start to look at the legislation, if the legislation was passed without a funding source, then I think our memo would look a lot different. There are multiple funding sources for it. Now, we have to monitor it very carefully and make sure that it's on time. And as we also noted in the staff report, continue to work with our legislators and the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to make sure that we're in the, we're advanced in the right priority for the release of the funds. But in my experience, I've never seen, even with the state of Illinois being what it is, I've never seen them not come through on grant funding legislation like this.
With the pandemic doing what it will with the economy and everything else, do you believe there's a significant increase in the risk that the state of Illinois will take a hit, especially if I heard something a couple days ago where they were predicting economic effects of this could take up to 5 years to unwind. And so with the following trail of how the economics of this are going to hit, they're going to hit our taxes, our revenue, they're going to hit the state of Illinois.
Sure. I think that there's going to be some delay in the rollout of the funding, but the funding, as was laid out in the staff report, is carved into various buckets, right? Mm-hmm. So when you look, for example, there's MFT fuel tax increases that have already been rolled out. Now, driving has been impacted, but as a vaccine is rolled out and we start to resume normalcy, you're going to start to see these revenues start to match the activity of the economy. I would think that there's going to be some impact. I can't say to what degree, because I'm not the budget analyst working on their funds, but there will probably be some delay here. But what we've heard from our legislator is that they do plan on rolling as much out as they can. So,
Well, Rob, this also, Rob, gets to the point of the bond issue. Half of the Rebuild Illinois roughly is from the bond issue.
Right.
Once the bond issue comes out, I think we'd all have a lot more comfort.
Right.
We're good. Right.
Right.
You could have some delays on the pay-as-you-go and stuff, but that bond issue is really mission critical to get this thing done.
Okay, can I jump in here for a second? Because there's a couple things and Bob, this since the inception of this was before your time and surely before Rob Apatow's time. The one thing I need to remind everybody of is that when President Grable sent me on a mission to begin conversation with the Forest Preserve, and the council at that time agreed that I was to pursue the agreements with not only the Forest Preserve, but any subsequent agreements that we would need to pursue. There was never any discussion that, going down that path was predicated on finding $28 million of free money. It's money that we found along the way, much like there's money that we found in TWOFers with other taxing bodies and money that we found in design efficiencies. Certainly the conversation would be a little different if we didn't have the $28 million. But thinking back 5 years ago when I was sent on my way and asked to move this forward, there was never a conversation from anybody at council on that time or any council subsequent to that, since we only found out about this 28 mil about, 3-4 months ago, Rob?
Correct.
That $28 million of free money was going to be the deciding factor in moving this project forward. Certainly I've got a hunger for it. And the one thing I found is this village has been reluctant to ask for it. And I'm going to keep asking, and I'm going to go out there every chance I get with my hand out looking for money. Some is going to come home and some won't. This was a nice little reinforcement that by doing the right thing and treating people like human beings, they'll actually work for you if you ask them to. And I think we are going to have similar response with local governmental and quasi-governmental authorities. And I really think we're going to get really good reception at the federal level too. So we'll keep asking, but this project was never predicated on any free money. It really was a bootstrap project from the very beginning, from the very inception.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we not go forward because of fears about state funding. It's just a question about, do we need to, is there something, if there was a great risk of the state not coming through for some reason, then do we need to think about gathering money from other places? But so I'm not suggesting that we not.
Or paying for it out of pocket. I've always been intrigued. Excuse me, Penny. I've always been intrigued by the idea of maintaining the current level, the fee structure as we currently enjoy it, even though half of the money that was borrowed back in 2013 and 2014 was used on a project that had nothing to do with what we're dealing with now, okay? But at the same time, that was the reality that was delivered to us in 2015 when we had the vision and decided to look forward to different ideas. So, we look at, if the money blows up and it turns out that Durbin and Duckworth don't want to work with us or help us, yeah, we got to sit down and figure out how we're going to pay for it. And clearly the easiest way, just a sec.
No, I'm just, no problem.
The easiest way to pay for this, or the way that may have been projected to pay for it if we hadn't worked so hard to try to find alternative sources, would have been by just simply raising the fee. So, and I don't want to have that discussion tonight because I don't think we have to, but when we started this, that was the only source outside of savings of, the money we've been saving in the general fund since 2011, and what was left over from the bond issues in the stormwater fund. And we have to keep that in mind. this is a great find here, you know, and if it materializes the way I believe it is going to materialize, it's $28 million of free money. And Steve and Tim and Rob, I'm driving them nuts with, oh, look what I found here, look what I found there. Having them sometimes chasing their tail for grant requests. But I mean, we have to remember that originally the whole idea was we're going to probably end up having to pay more for this. And I'm just trying to find ways not to pay more. So yes, Penny, what do you have to say now?
Sorry, I didn't mean I wanted to jump in. I'm here, I have a question. I think hats off to you all because it's not free money. I mean, it's money that is, I think, honoring the multi-jurisdictional nature of this project. It's not just us. It's that you guys have worked really hard to work with our other government entities, and it is a regional project. So, you know, you guys have worked really hard for us, and it really has a regional impact. So it's money that we hadn't planned on originally, but it's really important grant money. I think the question that Jack asks is important just as an exercise that, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but just, again, just making sure that we have a backup. Also to let people know what the importance of these grants are to us, that, you know, what would our funding structure look like if we were just doing it ourselves? Again, nothing big deal, but I think it's just important for us to know what that would have looked like in a very general sort of a way. Right. And again, if something blows up, then what are we going to be looking at? But again, the regional nature and the multi-jurisdictional nature of this project is amazing, and it's worth funding for the other government bodies. So I think it's great.
Yep. And I wasn't taking exception to Jack's comments at all. It was just that there was a recurring theme here about what if the state doesn't come through.
Well, we just want to make sure we're being thorough. Yeah.
And there's nothing, and I just wanted to reground us in what the original premise was when we first started this path. And just to bring us back down to earth on that there's a chance it might, and if anybody wants to do the math, every $1 million costs us about 77 cents additional fee. You're muted, Penny. So, you know, just so it's out there in the world, it's about 77 cents per million to service the debt on a bond issue.
Good. Great. That's good info to have out there.
So,
thanks.
Yeah. And
for ERU.
Right. Correct.
Right.
One other thing I'd like to just mention to the council is that I don't want to be the cheerleader for the state of Illinois. If there was any sense that I've received in our conversations and our inquiries, I would bring that forward. But yes, the pandemic is there. It's impacting everyone. Would there be a delay? Could there be a delay? Yes, absolutely could be a delay. We have to be flexible enough to plan for that. But I also thought it was important to share with you what my experience has been with the state with respect to legislatively authorized grants to municipalities. So, and I think based upon what I heard from Robin Gable was that this was a commitment that went across multiple sectors: health, education, broadband, infrastructure. It hits the gamut, right? So they have a lot of political capital tied up in ensuring that these grants are actually issued. But we'll have to watch it very carefully and be able to adjust if something doesn't materialize timely as we expect.
Okay, what I would like to do is move on to public comment if we're good with where we're at now. Because these nice people have been waiting in the room. So Kristen, why don't you go for it?
Okay, so first I will recognize Carol. Carol, you're unmuted.
Oh, thank you. I just want to say that I'm really impressed by the discussion this evening. And I think everything looks great. And I do applaud everyone's work on this. And I have nothing further to say at this time, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Next, Kim.
Hi, no comment.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Hale?
Yes, thank you. Hey, Chris, you and this council have been a breath of fresh air when it comes to recognizing the importance of respecting the residents that are going to be impacted by all this work, not just the residents that will benefit from the work. So first, thank you for that. But when and how can those that'll be impacted understand when they'll be impacted? So when will we have a schedule of when some of this construction will hit the various regions of Winnetka?
Particularly across the street from Crow Island School, right?
Gee, well, you read my mind, Chris.
Steve? I'll let Steve Saunders speak to that. Thanks for coming tonight, Mike. I appreciate it.
Sure. So the first project that would be constructed is obviously in the Forest Preserve, which would have any really limited impact on any residents. And then the next projects are on the golf course and Duke Childs Field. As we get into awarding engineering contracts, then we have an idea of what the schedule is for actually bidding the project out. And part of the engineering work for capital projects involves public outreach and coordination, meeting with affected groups, working through access plans and restoration schedules and things like that as the project is being designed. So there will be kind of two-way communication during the design process that will be both trying to understand the impacts so that we can mitigate them, and then also communicating the construction plans and schedules so that residents have an opportunity to understand what's coming, and we can kind of mutually work around each other, as it were, while the construction's going on. These are large projects, so there's really no way to mitigate all of the impacts, but good communication up front, at least so everybody knows what's coming, and what we can do about it, and what things just kind of can't be mitigated is the plan that we would anticipate.
Say, Steve, that of course is a very precise and logical process. But it really would be helpful if you could put some type of parameters on, gee, Crow Island's going to happen in 2022, 2023, and these other regions are going to be in these this kind of time zone. You got to be able to put some type of parameters so people can plan.
Sure. And that is part of what's communicated in our 5-year capital plan. And we'll be communicating that out, kind of reading the room of where this is going. We'll be able to communicate that out to the community coming up here shortly. But kind of for your specific level of interest, all of the south of Willow storage and conveyance projects are sort of in the 2023-24 construction timeframe, the way the capital plan is laid out now, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great, and be able to translate it to that kind of specificity would, of course, I'm grateful, but all the other, this is a massive project. There's going to be a lot of people impacted. And you just really need to get in front of that with some type of time parameters. So thanks for that consideration.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And we'll be in contact as this thing develops or as it moves forward. So certainly you'll be in the flow of information as this begins. And there's a lot of unknowns yet, to be honest with you, on the technical side. So as we know it, we are certainly, I think as a council, desirous of making sure we share this with all the people that are going to be impacted and benefited by it as well. So.
Good, thank you, I'm good.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, and then the final person in the room joined us, Mr. Chuck Dowding, and he raised his hand in mute. So I am going to ask him to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me? Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, Chuck.
Hey, Chuck.
Well, listen, congratulations, guys, on bringing this project so far along. And obtaining those external funds, that was really wonderful to hear. I think the financial plans are sound and sound enough to move forward. However, I had a couple questions. After obtaining permissions from the Forest Preserve of Cook County, how many other permits are still required? For instance, the Corps of Engineers was mentioned this evening. I've noticed at least in studies I've done, that permit costs are pretty significant. And the second question, what are the annual engineering costs, and is engineering complete, and are engineering costs in addition to the construction cost?
I'll let Steve speak to both of those. I will say though, Chuck, the one thing that we are trying to do is get the project classified as a regional permit, which could save us upwards of $1 million if we were successful in that endeavor. But we haven't had substantive conversations with the Army Corps yet on that. We probed a little bit a couple of years ago, but it's time to really get in the ring with them and find out if we can get them to budge off the permitting for them. But I'll let Steve speak to the rest of it.
Sure. So the two major permissions that are required are the Cook County Forest Preserve and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. There is an MWRD permit that's required for that project. The North Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District has a requirement for a sedimentation control plan. You're right that the permit fees for wetland mitigation on the Army Corps, on the Forest Preserve project are hefty, and they are built into the program budget. With respect to engineering, we have funds built in for engineering, detailed design and construction engineering of all of the projects that are also accommodated in that $75.7 million program cost.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Is that all, Chuck?
I had one other question. There were a number of parts of the presentation tonight that weren't in the agenda packet. Will they be available in the future and in other agenda packets, or?
We will post the PowerPoint presentation that goes along with it.
And then the appendices weren't in the agenda packet either, so I couldn't find them anyway.
They should be there. We'll make sure that they are, Chuck.
Thanks. Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention too.
Chuck, I responded to your email with that link. The appendices are at the very end. They start on page 22 of the agenda packet. So I did email a response to you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chuck.
Say what? Sorry. Did I step on somebody?
No.
Oh, I love this Zoom stuff. Kristen, how are we with any other attendees wanting to speak?
Those are all the attendees in the room have been recognized, and there are no additional email comments at this time.
Okay. Great. Well, now we can bring it back for a little conversation at the council level then. Two questions on the table. First, is the budget acceptable in its current form? And second, the capital stack. Let's work them one at a time. So we'll go ahead and have added on the budget. Any issues, concerns, comments, or other things? How do you feel about it one way or another?
Just a simple question on, there's the revenue source of sort of unknown of about $5 million, or I think that was the number. Is that within expectation in a normal thing to have in a project like of this size?
Well, as I mentioned before, Jack, I mean, you know, when we started, we knew we had a project that was going to be, you know, that had a starting point of $60 million 5 years ago, escalated today to 70, okay? You know, up to this point, we knew we had funds in the stormwater utility, and we knew we had our piggy bank in the general fund that was being set aside for that. So that was the basic math that we've all been kind of penciling things with when we started this 5 years ago. So the 5 million is a far lower number than I would have expected to be talking about from a how do we pay for it sort of a scenario.
Trustee Coladarchi, I would say that of a project of this magnitude, to have a funding gap at the end of the $5.5 million is pretty good, to be honest with you. And hopefully, you know, that's what will materialize as we go forward. So it's generally not, for projects of this size, not seen as an impediment. A couple things to keep in mind is the ability to build the upstream conveyance maybe on a pay-as-you-go. I mean, that's still being worked out with Strand, so that wouldn't necessarily necessitate any other bond issues. That's one issue. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the general fund transfer of $4 million a year ends at the end of this 5-year plan. And as we go along, we can decide how to allocate that additional $1 million. We can save up and build the rest of it, or we might bond off of it, or we might need it for another project, whatever, but we built in a lot of flexibility here at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And if I might add, I'll also add that the contracts that we do for the construction and as we go forward will also provide plenty of opportunities for you all to deal with cost issues. So that way you aren't, you know, you're left in situations where you're contracting for the entire amount of the project all at once before you've dealt with all the various funding aspects. As Steve Saunders talked about, this will be put out in multiple contracts to assess and control for risk. And we will make sure that in all those contracts that we appropriate capture the funding streams, how they're going to come in, timing of payments, you know, supply side, so we can choose how much to build. So that will be addressed from a contractual perspective as well.
Thank you.
Chris, I think it looks, so that's my comment. It's rock and roll.
Yep, let's get it done. Let's go.
Hey, John, it's nice you're not in a cave this week. We like to see you. I feel a lot more comfortable that we've talked about backup contingencies in terms of if, you know, the bids costs come in higher than we expect, or we run into something unexpected. So it's good to have other possibilities identified at the outset. So thank you for making me feel more comfortable about that. And again, just being sure that we feel comfortable that we are adequately covering with contingencies the construction cost escalation over the course of the 5 years, if we're looking at it all now in 2020 dollars. So those are that's like my major, what is it, would be blanky to feel good about this whole thing. But I feel like it's a really sound project. So I feel good about the budget.
Thanks. Rob? There you are.
No, I have no new observations other than, you know, what I said. I think I have more comfort, I think, from Rob Bahan's explanation on the state, because they scare the hell out of me. I have more comfort on Steve Saunders' review of kind of the sequencing of projects in case that allow us to understand things as they go along. So I think those are my two big worries, and I think this has come a long way, and excited about it. It really is everything.
Great, that's great. Jack and Bob, you're kind of hanging out there yet?
No. I agree, Chris. But I think, to have a conversation like we've had tonight, looking at the risks of certain aspects of a project of this size is certainly something that is warranted. I think we're all behind the project. There's no question about that. But this is the kind of conversation you have to flush out the issues, and I think that they've been handled very well by Steve and Rob and others. So, I think we're all, seem to me, of one mind to forge ahead.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, look, at this thing's going to change 10 times.
Right.
I mean, this is the point in the project where at least we have a good, I think we're beyond a conceptual design budget. We really are into design development. The nice thing about infrastructure, just to give you guys a little comfort, is, and Mike, Mike Waldron, I mean, no, I'm not insulting you, okay? But this is pipes in the ground. It's not, I mean, I've been involved in some fairly complex and challenging construction projects where there's all sorts of stuff that gets worked out in the design detail. I mean, Strand has been at this for 5 years now. They've got a really good feeling for a lot of the fundamentals of the system itself. But the good news is that laying pipe in Winnetka and laying pipe in Wheeling and laying pipe in Wheaton is pretty much the same price. So we're not dealing with anything exceptional from the standpoint of the actual components of the system itself. But things are going to move and they're going to change, and there are still things that are unsettled in the design that we've got to work through. We're still looking at a number of potential different paths for the Crow Island pipe. I mean, we've looked at several already, and we're going to continue to look at that. Steve had some great ideas, and we just keep throwing it against the wall on that to see if what's going to end up sticking. Could change the pricing, could make a difference, but we don't know that at this point. But the one thing I know is that this 75 million, if it was my project, it was my personal project, and I was doing it as a commercial enterprise, that this would be about where I would expect to be when I started going to the banks and asking for money to finance it. So I think we're having the conversation at the right time. The level of detail is much better than just conceptual, and it really should get us moving in a really good direction. And as always, Andy and I are stuck in this thing and connected at the hip. And as it develops, we're going to keep checking and cross-checking and double-checking to make sure that the numbers. So if we do have budget blows, we don't get too far down the line, a la the tunnel, and they go, oops, we missed something. I mean, the whole idea is to keep watching this as we go through the process, making sure that all of the pennies align and that we don't miss anything when we finally do commit to a groundbreaking and moving forward. So, and yeah, I put a lot of work into it, but it's not Chris Rince's project, it's the village's project. So at the end of the day, I said this in the very beginning when Gene asked me to start working on it. I said, I'll be happy to drag it home, but it's up to you guys to decide whether we're going to do it or not. So I'll keep dragging it home, and you guys keep telling me whether we're on the right track or not then. If that works for you guys, it'll work for me. I don't have a life outside of the village anyway.
Let your dog chew on it for a while.
Hey, Chris, I'm going to be leaving my job at Kellogg teaching and going into the pipe and cement business, just in case you wanted to know.
Oh, I'm biting my tongue on a couple levels right now, but
Good.
Would that be a budget savings or a budget surplus?
Seems to me that a few people just down the street from you have a pretty good handle on that market already, Rob, so.
I hear you.
All right, so are we good for, on both ends? Where we are today, this isn't a written in stone thing. It's just giving Steve the ability to take this and start moving it to the next level and getting a little bit deeper into the details and going forward.
So what are the next steps?
Steve?
Well, the next, I mean, we'll continue on with the work that Strand is working on, the Forest Preserve. We have in the budget for 2021, beginning design on the other two west of Willow storage projects on the Park District and Duke Childs Field. And then assuming that everything goes well with the Forest Preserve and we can timely get through the Army Corps, we're starting construction on the Forest Preserve project at the end of 2021. So you've already put the key piece in place when you awarded the contract to Strand back in September. So that they're working full speed on that. And then at some point in early 2021, Jim will be bringing engineering design contracts to the council for the next set of storage projects.
Do we need to take any official action as a council saying like, okay, this is the plan that we have that we are standing behind? Is there anything official we have to do?
No, there's no votes or anything. This is really just policy direction.
Okay.
Broad policy direction, so.
Yeah.
I think we only vote when we have the contracts, right, Rob?
Correct.
So, great. Well, I think that does it, right?
Yeah.
Feel good? All right, well, thank you. It's been a long road. I feel really good about where we are, and I really think we have the opportunity to do something really special for the community here. So I hear the concerns. I understand the conservative nature of our council, and I understand the conservative nature of our community. I'll always respect that, but at the same time, I'm just going to keep slamming it as hard as I can and seeing what we can get done. So, well, with that said, I think we can close her up, huh, folks?
Wait. I want to say one more thing. Mike Waldron is there, but not there. Strand has done a great job. I think you guys hit a home run when you picked Strand to do the job. So we don't recognize them enough. They have had some pretty creative ideas and they've worked really hard at it. So that's been great. Thank you, Mike Waldron.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hire a couple more engineers and get moving.
Yeah, I'm looking to do that.
Out of this 2022 stuff, let's start moving this forward.
I know you scare me with September of 2021.
You should be used to it by now, Mike.
I am used to it, yeah.
Okay, guys.
All right, I'm done.
All right, well, listen, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Give a second.
Second.
Okay.
I think we got Apatow and.
Yep. Trustee Apatow?
Yes.
Trustee Kripe?
Yes.
Trustee Dearborn?
Yes.
Trustee Lampier?
Yes.
Trustee Smirk?
Yes.
Trustee Caladarchi?
Yes.
Awesome, folks. We stand adjourned, and I know Chris